Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar. As you would know already, yes, my name is Clement, Dr. Clement Sifanyako. I am a lecturer in peace, security, and development at King's College London at the African Leadership Center. And today I have the pleasure of introducing the maiden seminar series on nurturing capacities for interdisciplinary research and impact. And this series, as you have read already, is focused around peace, conflict, environment, technology, inequalities, and identities. It is co-convened by the African Leadership Center based in London and Nairobi, and the Institute for Peace and Security Studies based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Now, other partners who are part of this co-convening are based across the world in Europe and Africa. One important thing to note about this seminar is that it is within the Center of Excellence for Interdisciplinary Peace, which is being sponsored by, it's a Center of Excellence being sponsored by African research-focused universities, which is ARUA, and European research universities under the Guild. Now, this is the first in the series to be convened every quarter. And generally, this seminar series will focus on presenting contributions that are interdisciplinary, intergenerational, and attentive to policy, practice, and academic excellence. So I welcome you all to today's session, the maiden one. If you are here, you are making history. Now today, we are very lucky to have two experts who will present their work on a very important topic in the context of war and post-conflict reconstruction. Now, their presentation is titled Mine Clearance and Infrastructure in Angola and Somaliland. Now, I'll tell you a bit about the seminar, and then I will introduce the presenters to you so that they can take it from there. But before I do that, let me remind you that the seminar will run for about an hour and a half, and two presenters will speak, a discussant will respond, and then you have opportunity to ask questions. Please drop your questions into the chat box if you have any in the meantime. Now, this presentation will discuss research and research impact in relation to mine clearance, peace building, and development in Angola and Somaliland. The first component, in fact, there will be two components of this presentation. The first component will focus on analysis of the interactions between anti-vehicle mines clearance and longer-term peace building and development in relation to agricultural conservation, trade, and infrastructural development priorities, which are set in the provinces of Cuando, Cubango, and Huambo in Angola. Now, the analysis in this first part will mainly be qualitative and demonstrate how clearance addresses sustainable development goals and infrastructure priorities towards economic and physical reconstruction outcomes. Now, the second component will be a discussion of the impact and engagement work that have accompanied the analysis of mines clearance and longer-term peace building and development in Somaliland. This component includes the work of practitioners as well as policy actors within the two contexts, especially focusing on Somaliland and in global situations. Now, let me turn attention to speak briefly about the two speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Eka Ipe. Okay, Dr. Eka Ipe, who is the director and reader at the African Leadership Center at King's College London. Her research offers a critical understanding of socio-economic transformation processes, which advance concept building and centers spaces in Africa and parts of the global South across the fields of economic development and peace. Her current themes of interest include developmentalism, industrial development, structural transformation, creative economies, health, peace building, and reconstruction. She currently co-leads two of the ARUA-Guild cluster of excellences that I mentioned. And the first One is on interdisciplinary peace, which is where this seminar series sits. And the second sector of excellence she co-leads is on creative economies in Africa. Part of her, big, ambitious engagement in policy and practice also has made her serve as a board member and trustee for ODI, which is a very, very popular institute international institute here in London. Now, the second speaker, Dr. Sarah Njeri, is a peace and conflict scholar with degrees in conflict resolution and peace studies based in SOAS. Her research has generated critical insights on peace building and humanitarian policies and practices. Prior to joining SOAS, she was a research fellow with Humanitarian Policy Group at ODI, and before that was a postdoctoral research associate at the African Leadership Center at King's College London. She has experience of working and researching on conflict prevention, post-conflict peace building, humanitarian disarmament, advocacy and development-related issues in Somaliland, Kenya, Ethiopia, Angola, and Sierra Leone, Tanzania, and Cambodia as well. Her current themes of interest include peace building, post-conflict reconstruction, environmental peace building, mine action, humanitarian disarmament, and climate resilience. Now, she also sits on the board of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association as the Africa Regional Director. Now, these two speakers have a lot under their belt, and we are so glad to have them present their very important research to us. Now, after they finish speaking, then I'll introduce the discussant as well, so you don't get bored listening to me this holy morning. So I would hand over the microphone to you, Eka, to speak to us about this very rich research, and then we can take it up from there. Please do drop in your questions if you have any into the chat box. I've seen someone raise a hand, but we are not inviting speakers yet. So, all right, over to you, Eka and Sarah.
This seems okay. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Clement. Thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you very much to my co-presenter, Sarah, and Esther, our discussant, and to all of you for being here as well. Really appreciate this. So as Clement has outlined, I'm going to start our joint presentation off by sharing specifically research that Sarah and I have carried out looking at Angola. You'll see on this screen here that research has been published this year in Peacebuilding as a journal. But it builds on work we did earlier on Somaliland. That too has been published in the Journal of Peacebuilding and Development. I won't go into that in the research part, but Sarah reflect a bit on what that means, how that interacts with some of the impact work that has been going on. Okay. So, title, Mine Clearance, Peacebuilding and Development in Angola. Okay. So what we're doing in this paper is we're analyzing mine clearance through a peace building and development lens. We're thinking of how these three things interact and engage. And it's an interesting conversation to be having because a lot of the research that looks at mine clearance in relation to development or looks at the impact of mine clearance tends to focus on a very short-term agenda. So it's really looking at the humanitarian period and thinking about, okay, if we clear landmines, can aid be taken to particular communities, or can healthcare be brought to them? Very little has been done that thinks about the long-term impact. And so that's why this body of work has been a useful contribution in the space. Now, the question we're asking is, to what extent the clearance of anti-vehicle mines interacts with longer-term peace building and development in Angola for the reasons I've just noted. Sorry. So here, another element of what has been possible through this research is the, if you like, development of a framework to carry out this analysis. And that's what we've called the Mine Clearance and Peace Building Synergies Framework. I'll expand on that very shortly. The kind of data we've used in our analysis, we focused on qualitative primary data. That again has been important because this can be very difficult data to access because of the kinds of spaces that we're studying or we're trying to understand or trying to comprehend. So we've looked at this qualitative data with particular attention to think about the ways in which mine clearance might interact with improvements in agricultural production, improvements in trade and access to markets, improvements in social and physical infrastructure, really key to the study, and improvements in social cohesion. We've looked at two specific contexts in Angola, Cuando, Cubango, and Huambo, and I'll explain why we've done that, even though some of the research we carried out was also done in Luanda, where we spoke to some key actors in the space. What we found is, even though there are these benefits to the clearing of landmines in relation to sort of development and peace building, there are some challenges that emerge. There's some endogenous factors such as, if you don't have wider infrastructural investment, then actually what mine clearance makes possible may not yield the kind of outcomes you want. The other element is thinking about exogenous factors, including environmental and climate change concerns. And of course, from Sarah's work and emerging body of work, these are points that are really pertinent to note. So here's a map just to flag where we are. I don't know if you can see my cursor at all, but there's Cubango that we're interested in, and there's Huambo as well. But in the research, there are conversations about what has been possible in terms of interactions between Huambo and or Huambo and Benguela, Namibia as well. And we can reflect on that, and Moshiko as well. And we can reflect on that in the paper too. So why are we talking about Angola? Why is Angola an interesting space to be having this conversation? Now, for points that, for instance, were not so clear to me when I started this work. So Angola is one of the most heavily mined countries in the world. Mines were laid there during the War of Independence in the period of 1975, but also the Cold War period as well. So you see this cumulative impact in terms of the laying of mines. And why were mines laid? Now, bear in mind that we are talking about anti-vehicle mines. These are distinct from anti-personnel mines. Our research in Somaliland actually looked at the collective of mines in general, but here we're really focused on anti-vehicle mines. So anti-vehicle mines are laid to block roads, block tracks. It's really about, as the name says, anti-vehicle. Block movement, especially using vehicles. Disrupt movement of opposing forces. That's another reason why they're laid. To also protect strategic infrastructure, right? To avoid people coming into that space. To deter attacks, and of course, very fundamentally, to instill terror, right? To make sure people are very nervous and worried about moving around. Now, AVMs pose an indiscriminate threat, but note that sometimes you can have AVMs and people can walk over those and they don't cause any problems. The problems emerge when people are driving. So there's a certain amount of weight that is required to trigger them off. This is why they're important when you think about longer term development. When you see folks moving from cultivating manually, if you think of agriculture, to cultivating using machinery, tractors and things like that. So at times you've had a lot of work clearing anti-personnel landmines because those are triggered by people walking. And then later on, the problem of AVMs emerges. Not always, but at times you can have this kind of a pattern. And then, of course, when we think about longer term peace building, as I mentioned before, this conversation about clearing anti-vehicle mines becomes really critical. So for instance, the use of tractors, road transport, rail transport as well, and building energy infrastructure. And we'll see some of this in the conversations today. So now I move to the framework that we developed as part of this work. Let me note that the framework builds on existing work in the space, but existing work that we found could deal with particular aspects, but not come together to really talk about this long-term impact of mine clearance as a subset of mine action. So we drew on the work that's been done to develop the humanitarian mine action peace building palette, drew on the work that has been done in linking infrastructure to peace building, and not necessarily to do with mine clearance, but really thinking about the materiality of peace building through infrastructure. So we found that work really useful. And a final framework we drew on was the framework that thinks about the interaction between mine actions and the SDGs. And in particular, as a subset of mine action, we were thinking especially about the clearing of mines. There are other elements to mine action, including how people are trained, how those that have been affected by mines are supported. So there's a whole realm, education, but our focus is really on clearing the mines. So from the first framework, the palette, we drew from there this focus on reconstruction, economic and physical reconstruction as part of long-term peace building. Now we find that, to some extent, there could be more depth in how that has been addressed, but we still found it quite a useful framework to draw on. From the second framework, we think about the transformative role of infrastructure alongside, so think of it critically, alongside some of the tensions that emerge. Sometimes we pose these things as just entirely positive without thinking of some of the unexpected, unanticipated negative impacts. And so we draw on those, and we'll touch on that in the analysis as well. The final framework we come to is thinking about that interaction between mine action and SDGs. And for us, this was interesting because it's an opportunity also to theorize about the Sustainable Development Goals. I know there's been a lot of work to try and think about that, but also to think critically about the Sustainable Development Goals. And a lot of colleagues have been engaged in that sort of work. And here, that is the image down there. And I'll go to a next page that shows really how we expect it to work. So the MPS, as we call it, really does two things. The first thing is it thinks about the lines of influence from when you clear mines to what happens in relation to infrastructure. And we think of infrastructure, we're framing that and drawing from the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are many ways you can think of that place of infrastructure, but we've decided to draw on the Sustainable Development Goals to help us sort of conceptualize this, hopefully for wider use as well. So that's that sort of orangish brownish line as the line of influence is moving in that direction. So when we think about the infrastructure related SDGs, we then reflect on what synergies. So if you have this mine clearance impacting infrastructure related SDGs in particular ways, how is that synergized to economic reconstruction as well as physical reconstruction, right? So that's the network of relationships we're thinking about there. We come further down and we think about how physical reconstruction and economic reconstruction are also synergized with peace building in the longer term. Yeah, so that's how we are thinking of the framework and how we have attempted to deploy the framework as well. And let me say, we've done it now with Somaliland, with Angola, and we're very happy for colleagues to engage with it, to critique it as well. You may use it and find it doesn't work quite as we thought it would, and we're very, open to all of those conversations. So I'd mentioned that we're looking at two case studies, Cuando, Cubango. And the reason we've looked at Cuando, Cubango is because it had very high mine contamination by global standards. And we looked at Huambo as well, because Huambo has experienced very widespread clearance. And as at the time we were carrying out this research, was designated to be declared mine-free very shortly after our research. I should have gone back to check what the situation is now, but it's just to say, this is a space where you've seen clearance happen over time. And so there's an opportunity to really think about the impact of that clearance. For those who followed the work of Princess Diana, for instance, I believe she went to visit Huambo as part of a very extensive work and contributions to thinking about mine clearance. Princess Diana of the royal family, let me note and not assume there. Now, in terms of the data we're using primary qualitative data that has come from field work through 9 focus group discussions and 31 interviews in 2019. This was a collaborative effort. There's a project, a report that has been published as part of this. So in the paper itself, we note all those that we worked with here, and of course, the very generous contribution of knowledge from those within these spaces that are sort of living with these realities. And you see there those we spoke to, a whole raft of colleagues, state actors, those from relevant ministries or ministries we thought were quite relevant. So there was some purposive sampling to this, but also some snowball sampling as well. It's quite a dynamic process there. So on this basis, we're able to think about the interaction between mine clearance and socioeconomic factors, also across geographical spaces. So rural context, peri-urban context as well. Thinking about mine action in Angola and peace building is pertinent. And part of that is because of the degree of contamination in Angola, it was very much a part of the peace building process, actually quite formally, in a way that may not be in other contexts. And we see this from the 1991 Accord under the UN Angola Verification Mission. We see it in the Lusaka Protocol as well. And in 2002, the UN Emergency Coordinator in Luanda called for mine action to be integral to the peace process. I know Sarah has been working on what's been going on in Ukraine as well. So it's, you know, very sad to see that this is still occurring. It's worth reflecting on what synergies may exist between these and the current situations where, unfortunately, this sort of contamination is going on. So the other point as to why we have to think about clearance and peace building is you have to think about investments in strategic sectors. If we're thinking of small scale farming, but moving to larger scale agriculture, it becomes a very important conversation to have. This link to agriculture, of course, thinking about access to fertile lands. So access is a big point, roads, how people move to places, how they go to cultivate, how after they cultivate, they actually get the crops, how they move them to the market, how they move them from the market. All of this becomes really critical. We think there are also investment in infrastructure, railway networks, road networks as well. And as we mentioned, social cohesion. We've seen that a lot of these actions, and you'll see in our reflections, you'll see that they have required clearance. We've seen additional efforts towards reconstruction, for instance, when we think of contamination of the headwaters in the Okavango, which is, you know, around the Cuando Cubango area, and the implications this have for the sort of diversifying the economy. So Angola, of course, is petroleum dependent, like my own home country, Nigeria. And there's been a lot of effort around how do you diversify the economy, hence a lot of emphasis on agriculture for one, but also thinking about ecotourism. And so Cuando Cubango becomes very important in a conversation like that. The other point that we've seen is around how when those who exist and live in these areas are restricted in terms of their movements, you see challenging situations around poaching, around overlogging in particular areas, and the implications this can have for biodiversity and sustainability. But of course, there are counter arguments to this point around the impact of clearance for the environment. Conversations we had in Somaliland, for example, highlighted how actually when you clear spaces that had been protected, actually important for biodiversity, because no one could actually access those spaces, then become at risk because people can now access and now go and exploit some of those spaces. So again, it's important to maintain a critical lens around these conversations. So let me come to deploying the framework. So thinking of the first space where a lot of our emphasis is on agriculture and economic economic reconstruction, what we find is, of course, you've had the mine clearance and it links to infrastructure related SDGs. So there in particular, we think of access to economic markets, and we think of food security, improved nutrition as well. A second point is we think of building infrastructure and transportation. Connecting that to what we've observed and linking that to economic reconstruction, we see how that access to economic markets is synergized with reconstruction through the possibility of higher quality production, the possibility of improved product varieties as well. We see improved trade and competitive prices as well. On the second point, in terms of building infrastructure and transport, we see that synergize also with economic reconstruction because it improves trade, improves competitive prices, and it reinvigorates the market structure. Some of the outcomes there linked to reduced journey times. We also see the strengthening of really significant and important institutions such as market institutions. Quite often, the discourse on institutions leaves out these really critical spaces. The other point I should note is in the corner here, again, I don't know if you can see my cursor, the contradiction. So there are all of these wonderful things going on, but what we also found was the need for wider investments. For instance, in transport vehicles, if you have improved opportunities to move around and folks don't have the vehicles to use to move around, it becomes a problem. If you have these possibilities and the road networks are not able to serve their full function, that's also a challenge and a problem. If you have the possibilities with this better agricultural production, but you have droughts, that is a problem as well. So here I've just highlighted some of the really important knowledge we were able to draw on for this piece of research. There we've taken a quote there, and you think of tractors and other forms of capital equipment that are important for higher quality production. And colleagues telling us how they're now seeing a shift from manual approaches to more mechanical traction and animal traction. That would be quite difficult if you still had contamination in those spaces. We see conversations around the possibility of cultivating across 2 seasons because of access to irrigation, right? Again, those are things that are now made possible because of clearance. What we see linked to this better production is also crop diversification, right? So moving into growing potatoes and vegetables because these are more profitable where this was not possible previously. The second point there, reconstruction of transport infrastructure and improved trade and reinvigorated market structure. We see this point being made because it is possible now to trade across regions, and that is due to the availability of trains. We see also access to markets, reinvigorated markets, and how that's linked to increased trade. External products are able to come through Cuando, Cubango and move away from Cuando, Cubango, but also be consumed in Cuando, Cubango. So actually the nutritional benefits of all of this. A key point is made, and I highlight that here, how people are also not afraid anymore and how that is important, the connection between fear and the construct of the market as an institution. Now, I work on northeastern Nigeria as well, so I really fully appreciate what it means when, because of fear, farmers are not going to cultivate anymore. So the roads are fine, right? They don't have mines, but because of fear, they can't go and cultivate anymore. So how important that sense of safety is as well. So we move to the next and final contribution here, thinking about the framework in relation to transportation. And so we've highlighted some images there for you. Now, as we did previously, thinking about that clearance that has occurred, and we think about the implications there in terms of infrastructure-related SDGs, the increased access to economic markets, and the second point there, building infrastructure, transport, housing, and settlements comes up here more than it did in the previous iteration. Now we think of how that is synergized with physical reconstruction this time. And we see access to economic markets is synergized with reconstruction through improved railway transport and pricing structures. Access to new markets come out of that, trade over longer distances and improved product varieties again show themselves here. We see the second point there around building infrastructure, transport, and settlements, and how that is synergized with reconstruction through road construction, through reduced transport costs, and also through new energy and social infrastructure. That is very much linked to the expansion of settlements. This is a point that comes up more strongly here than it did previously. And we see connections there between, in terms of outcomes, new energy infrastructure being put in place, power lines, hydro dams as well. And in the conversation about hydro dams, you think about sort of more clean sources of energy emerges there. Improved access to health services, water, schools are other points we see. So now let's come quickly to these contradictions, this what I've highlighted there in red. There are, so now you have these roads in place, but now what we found, what we heard from the conversations are concerns from residents about the lack of speed limits on the road. So the question around safety, you've introduced this piece of infrastructure, how it's used becomes really critical. And we were speaking to colleagues in many of these spaces who were highlighting how they were worried about children being near the road. They had to be very careful about where they left their animals now in a way they didn't have to think about previously. Another point that comes up, of course, is the finance that is available to support this kind of infrastructural development. And you see Angola, especially around the time we were doing this study, as I mentioned before, a major net exporter of petroleum, really suffering from the decline in petroleum prices. And this actually puts a halt to some of the work that was being done. So important to think of this more broadly. Here again, I highlight some of the quotes from colleagues sharing some of the points that I've highlighted in the slide previously. You know, we see a possibility because of the reconstructed Benguela Railway. It's possible now to move dry fish from Benguela to many other parts of the country, from Moshiko, possible to move goods from Moshiko to many other parts of the country, and on. We see that. Another really interesting point that was raised was a government policy on keeping the price of train tickets really low, and that this was a social and political tool to allow for the reintegration of people. It's really very much recognized that this separation of people, of communities, was an outcome of the war, of the conflict, wars and conflicts, and it was important to be deliberate, be intentional about addressing that as part of rebuilding, as part of peace building as well. A point is made also about that division between those in urban settings and those in more rural settings. So the exact point was around enhancing human relations between the city and the countryside. We see this come out quite clearly. The second point there around a reconstruction through road transportation and reduced cost and new infrastructure, just key points to raise: how following clearance, road construction has connected communities for trade and improved levels of social infrastructure. So especially thinking of schools, and we actually saw some of the schools that were now being built, you know, as a result of these improved access. We also spoke to colleagues who revealed that actually the cost of transport had decreased because of this better access to roads as well. A final point I'll note here is how clearance has made it possible to have roads to enable the building of power lines and the building of hydro dams as well. There was some clearance that occurred on the dam as well, and this has enabled the transmission of electricity to various parts that we saw on the map earlier. And then finally, I wrap up by saying that our paper is adding to a limited but expanding scholarship that is thinking about the longer term impact of mine clearance beyond that humanitarian phase. And so the paper is also highlighting this distinction across phases. A lot of attention to the humanitarian, but we must think of the developmental phase and how that allows us to think across various contexts as well. And then Angola itself introduces a very interesting set of issues for us to think about. We can think about the international political economy. A lot of conversations go on about the relationship between many African countries and finance, especially from other parts of the global south. In Angola, a lot of the railway infrastructure we saw had been financed by relationships of finance coming from China in various ways. And you know, we know that they're very complex conversations to be had about foreign capital in that sense. But we saw that, and so that reliance, that dependence, some of the implications of that, and then of course Angola itself, reliance on petroleum exports and the implications that commodity price shifts can have on sustaining some of these very important interventions that are going on. So it's important for us to bear this in mind as we have these conversations. I will leave it there and hand over the baton. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Eka. Let me, bring my video back to life. Thanks. So, I mean, we've listened to very, you know, interesting conversation, sharp analysis around, you know, mine clearance as both a military tool and avenue for peace building. And I see a very interesting systems framework analysis there. That obviously will feed into the conversation. You spoke about the contradictions and challenges, which are even very pertinent as well. Now, at the moment, let me hand over to Sarah, who will take us from here, and then we can come back and wrap up and have a conversations where Esther would also jump in with her critical reflections. Okay, so Sarah, over to you, please. I think you're on mute, Sarah. You started very well with a good smile, but we missed all the fun.
sorry about that, Mark. Yeah, I was just thanking the ECA and the ALC colleagues for inviting me to participate in this session, and thanking you, Clement, for the good introduction there. Just to say that the study on mine action, which is where landmines clearance falls under, renders itself well to interdisciplinary research, as Eka has alluded to. I think I started this research from a peace and conflict perspective, peace building in Somaliland, and been doing that for years. And now I see the spaces opening. For example, I'm working closely with people working on climate change and climate resilience to demonstrate how this interlinks in terms of, living mines on the ground. And I think what events that are happening in the world today are kind of shining a torch to that, and especially on the climate change space. So I think my brief here is to talk about the research specifically on Somaliland. Eka mentioned that we published the paper on Somaliland in the Journal of Peacebuilding and Development, and this was published in April of 2022. So we were very lucky in the sense that we got some funding from the School of Global Studies at the King's College, and this was secured from it was an ESRC, Economic and Social Research Council, NGO Impact Acceleration Account Fund, and those funds allowed us to was awarded to support NGO partnership. So, and we partnered with an international demining charity called the Halo Trust, and our aim was to assess the quality and quality of their data and extent to which that data we could clean that data to enable for wider use. And we worked through advice from Hello Trust. We worked through an organization called Transparency Solutions, where we hired a local Somaliland data analyst called Nazra, a really committed young lady who was hosted by Hello Trust and worked to clean the data. And this process and the emerging data formed the basis of our paper and enabled us to come up with the framework that Eka has just presented about. Consequently, we've been fortunate in the sense, in the policy sense, because when you do academic research, it's always comforting that when organizations, policy actors are interested in your expertise and seeking advice to evidence their research or their efforts. So Hello Trust approached us and sought evidence from our data, the data that we were collecting on Somaliland, to help build a case to initiate a project they were interested in securing funding for on borderlands. And this was Somaliland and Ethiopia border region, where mines have been that they've not been able to clear mines previously, and this evidence that this work that we supported, or the evidence that we provided, was submitted to several donors. I was invited to a session which was invite only with donors and other stakeholders, and this was at the sidelines of a yearly meetings that happens every year with the national directors of mine action directors, and it's held in Geneva. And during the session, Hello Trust presented a paper on the need for clearance of the border regions between Somaliland and Ethiopia. The project was later funded, and clearance has been going on since 2022. Similarly, there was, I think, when we started the project, and the NGO academia collaboration for us was, our project had a vision of being an exemplar, what we can call an exemplar for what happens between NGOs and academia collaborations on mine action and mine action data use. So there was a conversation with an organization called ITAD, and ITAD is spearheaded. They were spearheading a research project that was seeking to look at NGO data, especially in the mine action space. ITAD also is the default or the de facto DFID, then DFID, now FCDO, project evaluator for mine action programs. And they were looking into having, they engaged in data collection, and they were coming across a lot of instances where there is a lot of data, but there is, what do you do with that to make that data more meaningful? So they started a consultation process, and we were part of that, or a dialogue process. I was engaged with other policy actors and practitioners, and consequently we were invited to present this collaboration, this Hello Trust ALC collaboration as an exemplar, NGO academia collaboration for mine action data. And I think the conversations have been going on, and there's more attempt, I think, in terms of getting NGOs and academics in the mine action space to talk together or collaborate. So I think the other point I want to raise is that the project, as an exemplar of engaging other researchers as well. So during one of the feeding back, so we were very keen in terms of our research, taking the research back to the communities from where we'd been collecting data. So we invited all, we engaged all people from different disciplines, different sectors, and we had engagement with the Hargeisa Cultural Center, where we invited its director, Dr. Jama Musa, to participate in our research dissemination event. And we invited specifically, we specifically invited him to offer his reflections regarding mine clearance and culture. And since then, I've seen a conscious engagement and linkage of mine action matters to issues of culture. And the Hargeisa Cultural Center was an important, for example, let me rephrase that. The Hargeisa Cultural Center was an important participant to a recent mine action research project that I've been involved in on climate change and resilience, because you're bringing in different disciplines, different understandings to the conversations, and they played a key role in that research that we were conducting in 2000 and last year, actually. It seems times just flies by nowadays. The other one that the other impact that we had is Eka and I drafted a response to a call for written evidence on issues on Africa, and I think I was trying to remember exactly the specifics of the call. We have a link for our contribution to that, and we can pop that into the chat if anybody is interested in looking at that, where we kind of outline the need for longer term engagement in mine action, because sometimes what we are finding is that mine action for a very long time was only being considered for the shorter humanitarian purposes, and as Eka has alluded, it's quite clear now in Ukraine they're thinking about what they do for, within the shorter period of time. But because of the importance of Ukraine in terms of being the breadbasket, they need to think long term. So I think we were quite far ahead in our times then, because we provided the evidence on the need for mine clearance to be considered as something that, or an activity that is longer term, rather than being the short-sighted, as it were. So a final point I want to make is that also our research prompted during the research in Somaliland, we talked to different different people from different sectors, and one of those was road constructors. And in the conversation with with the road constructors, it kind of prompted them, you know, like I was trying to get to the question of, you know, are there instances where your work is cut short, or the implications of what happens when you find mines when you're doing, and that prompted the Somaliland Road Agency and mine action organizations to start engaging in conversations. I mean, there were conversations, but I think that those instances, especially with the road constructions, people really have to kind of bring that to the fore. And so through the interviews with the road constructors, we sought to understand the cost implications where there were encounters with mines and ERWs, just to demonstrate the need for clearance before we engage in long-term in kind of the socio-economic activities like road reconstruction. And this opened up, as I mentioned, opened up dialogue between the diverse sectors, and eventually there were suggestions for the need to incorporate mine action stakeholders during conversations on road construction in Somaliland. Also, as part of our research and our engagement in the Somaliland space, our colleague who was working, who's the engineer, was invited by the founder of one of the colleges in Somaliland to speak to the technical universities there, and to engage in that space to see how knowledge can be the cross-fertilization of knowledge. I'll leave it at that because I believe that everybody has loads of questions. We've raised some big issues there, and we are very keen to hear what others feel. Thank you very much, Clement. Over to you now.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks, Eka, for that initial thought-provoking reflection. Now, obviously, this research project has been, for sure, has been need-driven with impact in mind. And it's very refreshing to see, because it means that funding and efforts that went into this design and implementation were not just for academic audiences, but for wider community. I mean, the impact along policy and community needs pathways have also been well articulated, which is very refreshing as well. And thank you so much, Eka. Thank you, Sarah. Please keep your questions coming, everyone here, because after Esther speaks, we would invite you, I'll read out your questions, whether you use the chat box or the Q&A box, I'll read them out to the speakers. So please keep them coming. It's been a very refreshing conversation, so just let us engage it properly, as I assume that's going to happen. Now, let me turn my attention to Dr. Esther Oromidayo-Sonte. Hopefully I didn't butcher your name. If I did, pardon me. So Esther is a land administration and affordable housing provision strategy specialist with a focus on land affordability and sustainable housing development strategy. She has a Master of Arts, a Master of Science, and a Master of Philosophy. Oh. And all three are around housing development and management from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and estate management and valuation from the University of Lagos, also in Nigeria. Now, over the years, Esther has acquired experience as principal investigator in research writing as an academic, conducted research in land management, property performance, and middle-income housing provision and affordability. Esther has achieved membership of professional groups such as associate member of the Nigerian Institute of Estate Surveyors and Valuers, and is a registered valuer and a member of the International Facilitation Management Association. She has over 13 publications and 2 books. She's a member of the Center of Excellence for Interdisciplinary Peace, which is hosting this very thought-provoking seminar. So I would hand over to you, Esther, to reflect on what Eka and Sarah have presented in the last half an hour or so. So over to you, Esther, please.
Clement, I'm very grateful. Thanks for that exotic introduction, I must say. Yeah. And to the presentation, the presentation is, I'll call it, it's exciting. And then I was smiling as they were presenting it because they were really churning out a lot of data, bringing it out, for us to know and understand the situation in that particular area. Of course, it is a war-torn area, and then we know that there are other war-torn states in Africa and even in Europe, as it's happening right now. So I must say that this article is a very great one, is a great topic, which relates sustainable peace building. And of course, this is very crucial in a post-conflict countries like Angola that we have mentioned, especially as regards to this issue of mine clearance. Of course, we know that their paper has actually identified this issue of mine clearance as it gives confidence in building, of course, infrastructure, security reform, psychosocial recovery, of course, from trauma, this issue of economic recovery, which is also part of the infrastructure that is being talked about in the paper, issue of integration of refugees, political progress, development-oriented civil society, of course, the NGOs work well, and of course, the totality, generality of the national reconciliation of the whole country as a whole. Yeah, I would like to say thank you to Sarah for giving us that background information of how the data was actually collected, the validation processes, which is very important. But I'm thinking that, for this magnitude of study, yes, we have gotten the qualitative aspect. Can we also try to inject the quantitative aspect so that, it would help this study for a generalization purposes and objectivity? Of course, the qualitative sample you will get is about specifics, but in these instances, we would like to generalize because there are other war-torn states around us as regards to this issue of mine clearance. And I think we should also look at that aspect in this paper. Subsequent, of course, we hope that this study will also be domesticated in other African states or even across Europe, like Ukraine right now, where there is one. And I see the connectivity of this paper between mine clearance, infrastructure, livelihood, and peace building. Of course, if there's infrastructure, it's going to improve on the livelihood of the people. And if the people have things to do, of course, we should expect peace. It's only an idle hand, like this general saying, that, could have issues of sorts. So subsequently, I think we should have triangulation study in mind. Of course, we can use the quantitative to now check the qualitative data and vice versa. Of course, mixed method for this kind of study will be a super one. There are a lot of positivities about this research work. And of course, I did some other research, and I saw that Angola is saying by 2025, they want to have cleared every form of these landmines away from Angola. And now the question is that possible? It's over 20 years now after the end of the war, but we still have this issue of mine clearance, which is affecting people from going to farm, is affecting the infrastructure in that community. What can we do? What suggestion is this work bringing forward to be able to achieve this mine clearance by 2025? Because with this whole gamut of information that is placed before us, 2025 is so close. It's very close. Can we achieve this? So what policy suggestion can we give to the government of Angola to be able to strengthen this area? That's one. Two, the MPS framework. It's when I had to study it very well, it's connecting the livelihood, connecting the people, the social cohesion and the likes. But I feel there's something that needs to be included in that MPS framework, going forward. Because when I read about the land reform in Angola, of course, recently there was 2004 Land Act, which was passed to address the system of land tenure in Angola. And of course, you will agree with me that in a war-torn area, there's always the issue of land. People would have moved, you know, to a safer place, leaving their land and the likes. Now, when I read about land tenure system in Angola, I noticed that the original owner of that land have moved away, and now it's just the settlers that are sitting on that land. Now, the issue for peace, for sustainable peace, we must include the aspect of land tenure in that MPS framework, because land is one of the major issues that causes conflict. After all this infrastructure development and the roads are good, people can go to farm, and then the next thing is, oh, my land, my house used to be around this area, so where is it? So when they come, whoever that is there, and then they start another form of conflict. So we should also include that and look at that. That's very, very important. Aside that too, we have the issue of land use planning. Of course, in a war-torn area, we need land use, you know, planning in that area to replan. After the infrastructure, yes, infrastructure is very, very important. We need land use planning, and then we also need the strengthening of land users' capacity for sustainable land management. That's very important because all activities, you know, actually takes place on land. I have a lot of things to say, but let me stop there. Maybe during the question and answer, I'll be able to, you know, answer all the things I have in stock here. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. So I have a couple of questions on the in the Q&A box, but I'll come to them in a moment. Thanks so much. Esther, I think you have given us some methodological reflections for Esther, for Eka and Sarah to respond to, but also some, you know, like hands-on, like theoretical and empirical questions as well. I would allow Sarah and Eka a couple of minutes just in case you want to respond to anything that Esther said before we go to the questions we have. A few are coming in again. So Eka, did you want to respond to anything? Then Sarah.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you so much. First, you know, thank you to my co-presenter. She's done an excellent job of outlining the interesting things that have occurred. And to our discussant, Dr. Esther, thank you so much. Very, very thorough work. In fact, you've given me some lessons about how to serve as a discussant. Let me also appreciate that also coming from a background, of course, this vast expertise on land issues, you see how that plays in. And really, this is what we want the core for interdisciplinary peace to be doing, having these complex conversations that are only possible when people from different disciplines come in. Let me go to the, I think, excellent comments there and excellent points that you've asked us to reflect a bit more on. I think I agree with you. So the first point, so many very interesting things. The key ones I'll pick here. The point you make about potentially a mixed methods approach to this, a broader base of data to have these very important conversations. You know, I'd agree with you on that, that there's potential to do more there. And I think for the Somaliland study, we do try and do some of that. The challenge we face is the collation of data. And in fact, the project Sarah spoke about there, that was funded by the ESRC, the Economic and Social Science Research Council, supporting is an NGO academics collaboration to work on data that NGOs have. Because the amazing thing is that many NGOs have incredible data, but they collate it for their own purposes. They're not always immediately suitable for us to use as academics. But then one has to resource going to clean that data. So there's data available, but now trying to pull it together, to put it in a form that you can clean the missing parts. That's work we've been trying to do for many years, but we found it difficult to get resources to enable us to do that so that we can leave a data set that we will use and others will use. But I agree with you entirely on how this work can be deepened if we were to draw also on some quantitative data, imagine if you went and you looked, there were mines here, you've now cleared those mines, what has happened over a long period there vis-a-vis another area? Absolutely, I think it would be amazing. Halo Trust has some of that data, really interesting, but we had to do a lot of work to clean that up a bit. The second point you made on land, again, I think a very important point. And in fact, part of the critique of this sort of mine action space is the hesitation to deal with precisely the prickly political question of land that nobody ever wants to touch on. But you're right, you can clear all this. And if people start saying it was my land, it's not your land, we start with conflict all over again. And so I agree that is something to pick up on more. The other point I'll make is because we anchor this on the Sustainable Development Goals, again, this apoliticization of land issues is inherent in the Sustainable Development Goals. So for us to draw on SDGs, so that's perhaps a limitation of using the SDGs as the anchor of this. I just looked, and I think the SDG that would deal with that is SDG 15, but it doesn't deal with the political question. So it would be about critically engaging with that to bring on board these very pertinent points that you have made. And I totally take that on board. And I think about that as we move forward with this framework. We want it to be used more widely. How would we think again about the politics of land, really, in this work? Thank you very much, Esther. I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was going to mention, that there was an attempt on the qualitative space, that the work that Nasra was doing was collecting actually the data that Halo Trust has that is in quantitative, and to try and clean that. But Eka has elaborated more clearly. Yeah, there's quite a lot of data that mine action organizations collect, like acres cleared, number of people they reach, and this data sits in their data sets. I mean, in Angola, if you remember ECA, they had loads of data that we could, we would have taken and looked at, but without the resources for us to engage further in that was impossible. And we've made several attempts in applying for funding without success. You mentioned about the Angola's ambitious program for mine clearance in 2025. There is a bit of history to that within the mine action sector. I think the sector in itself was very pushing this date for 2025 to have clearance, mine-free world. I think the reality of it is that there is, for example, in Angola, is the type of mines that are on the ground that has made it very difficult to, the technology is not available yet that can detect these mines that are already on the ground and to clear that. So that has been the biggest barrier for Angola, and especially in Cuando, Cubango, that specific region. The other issue is funding. And what has happened is, if you look at the funding for mine action, is that it peaked when, those years when mine action was the flavor, kind of agenda post Princess Diana's engagement in Angola, mine action funding was at its peak. What we find is that over time, mine action fell off the radar, and a lot of work now has had to be done to remind donors that mine clearance is still an urgent and important sector. So that kind of challenges that, and the issues of land rights, as Eka has aptly mentioned, actually it was a huge critique in terms of the mine action sector more broadly. So the idea for them was our work is to go in and clear mines, forget about the politics and issues around that. And that fell really badly, fell flat on their face, because the issues of land rights, as you pointed out, the issues of do no harm in terms of and organizations, we don't want to create more challenges, and therefore that has been ongoing. How to engage that, and the sector itself has tried to deal with that by looking at how prioritization of land clearance is done. So there is a huge debate, and there is huge kind of experiments of how to prioritize to make sure that the issue, that land that is cleared is serves the larger community more generally, and that sometimes it desists from land where the issues of ownership has a problem. It's very difficult to get it bang on right, because we know especially in some or in a lot of African contexts that land issues is the cause of the conflict in the first place. So that's an ongoing debate and an ongoing concern, and there is a lot of work that goes on in terms of how they prioritize what they clear first and what gets left. But it is an important discussion, and there is quite a bit of work by several academics who are looking at the linkages between land rights and peace building. But it's within the peace building space. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, Eka, as well, for those reflective, thoughtful responses to Esther's equally thoughtful and thought-provoking discussion. So look, there are a few questions in the Q&A section. Many of them really are asking about what they can do to contribute to ALC's research and all. So I would say, please head to the ALC's website, King's College London's website. There are opportunities there that you can explore. If there are very specific requirements, specific needs you have that you need to engage with any of the discussants or the ALC, please send an email. We can have a conversation about that. Yeah. So in terms of questions for that are really addressed to the speakers, there are about 2 altogether that I've captured. But before I go to that, I wanted to know, this is from me, not from the audience. So ignore it. You can treat it with a pinch of salt if you want. But so this research really is impact driven, right? It's needs driven, response needs. That's why you've really built more like a global network of people who have a need for the data and for the research, but also people who will be impacted by the research. So I'm curious to know, especially because this platform is for impact-oriented research, what were some of the challenges in bringing together this, wide-ranging global policymakers, stakeholders together around this project, the way you've described it? Are there any lessons you can share with people on this platform at all? Any lessons, opportunities there? So maybe whoever wants to go, Eka first, or then Sarah, or yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question, Clement. Some of those are appropriate for a setting like this. Some of them are less appropriate for a big conversation. I think, the reality is it's really important to do this work collectively. Linked to that, though, everyone is after something different from some of these conversations at times. So the sort of timelines we're all working to may not be the same. The sort of outcomes we want from this may not be the same. So I think a big part is like the academics involved. And, if in this space, they're mainly academics. We have to have in our minds, what is the hierarchy? And we have to be honest about, is my end game really that this space is better understood? Is my end game really that what people feel and think in this space is what we should platform? Then if it is, there are certain things that might be the normal priority for us that need to take a back seat a little bit. You can go in quickly, get your data, go and write what you want and publish it. But at times, if you're going to ask deeper questions about, if you're going to query what you found, if you're going to accept some questions around that and rethink that, then that can shift how you're doing. If you're going to collect data, that also does no harm. So people will tell you all kinds of things. You have to decide which of that is ethical to carry on with or not, even though there's some hot things for you to continue to work with. These are issues, I think, to reflect on and to think about. I think the biggest one, though, was how we manage the different, because there will be different priorities that we have and an NGO has, right? They are thinking of the funding cycle. They're looking for material to help them keep the real life work they're doing continue. And we seem like this far away people that's just we're writing one paper out of how many others you're writing. So how do you come together to say, actually, I will subsume, you know, some of the things I may be driving as an academic will be subsumed in a larger agenda here? How do we in our minds make a decision about the hierarchy of priorities? I think is a big thing, especially academics need to do. I don't think it's the others. They are doing real life work. But as academics, we need to rethink some of those priorities. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you. Sarah, do you want to add anything at all? Okay.
Just to say that the mine action sector is, and I've been on record to saying that, it's a very enclosed space. Yeah. It's mostly led by people from the former ex-military, and they have different ways of dealing with issues. You know, very systematic, very siloed, and there's been a lot of work now going towards opening up that space. So I think for us, even as academics, to engage in that space was challenging, in the sense that we are coming in, just to put it out bluntly, Eka and I represent two Black women, coming to engage with a very kind of defined sector, so that it's a challenge to get into, be trusted to be able to partner with these organizations. And organizations, or the sector itself, is competing for very limited funding. So if they're going to spend an hour discussing something with us that, it doesn't have long-term kind of very immediate outcomes, it becomes quite challenging. And it's been, to keep them engaged and to continue having the conversations with them is a challenge, but it's doable with patience, and yeah. I'll leave it at that.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Now let me go to the questions. I mean, thanks so much. Those responses really, I think our audience here would have a lot to learn from that. Amanda Sauta from Malawi has a question. She's looking at the your shift of emphasis from short-term humanitarian focus of mine clearance to long-term approaches that she believes you want to emphasize. And she's wondering whether there are still active mines that may not have been uncovered, or that your approach is simply helping us to look at long-term effect of mines that were safely removed and are still affecting livelihoods. So basically just questioning why we should shift from short-term humanitarian focus to long-term action and response.
Yeah, I can give it a go. Amanda, thank you. I think it's a very good question. So, I mean, and Sarah may want to come in as well. I think it's a very good question. I think we see this as a continuum, right? If we can make a case for why it is important to think about landmine, both contamination and clearance, because thinking about clearance means we're also thinking about the contamination. Why it is important for us to think about it in the long term. We hope it still makes the point as to, why we should try not to be using landmines at all, but also why we need to think of it in the short term. So we're thinking of the long term because many people have thought of the short term, right? Especially humanitarian organizations, because the impetus for their work is quickly, move quickly. There's been conflict, let's go and take it out quickly. People forget about the long, if people have lived with these mines for a while, then is it a priority? And humanitarian spaces work like that. What is the rush we need to go to now? Anything that is not a rush for this moment, goodbye, we carry on. So this is why we are thinking of the long term, but I think we see it as continuing that work. A lot of work is done on the shorter term. We are thinking of the longer term, but collectively, we hope we are making a case as to why it is important to be thinking about these mines, why it's important to be preventing the use. I mean, we won't go into the very, very challenging space of countries that refuse to actually make the use of landmines illegal. You'll be surprised as to which countries are on that list. So we hope we're collectively making this bigger point. But yes, we focus on the longer term because it's a space that we argue has been ignored, but it's important for development discussions.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, yeah, please go on.
And just to add on to that, I think what we are seeing is, yes, there's the short-term responses that allows refugees to return, that allows relief to be delivered in some of these spaces. But then you've got mines that are left on the ground because they don't cause immediate threat. Now, those are the ones that are causing issues. For example, when they are flooding in places, these mines are going to shift. And that links to the longer term debate we are on climate change. We are thinking about populations expanding. So if you think about places like Cambodia, where there was a lot of concentration of clearing anti-personnel mines, and some anti-vehicle mines were left on the ground. When populations have grown, the need for space, comes in, and the need to diversify, as Eka had in our presentation, to diversify in terms of agriculture practices. You are using a djembe, I don't know, and manual whatever. Tilling of your land. Now you want to use a tractor, and when you start using that then causes all sorts of challenges. In Angola now, the biggest challenge, as Eckhart pointed out, is that there's this huge, vast area where it's mined, and which, if opened up, has the largest population of African elephants that could open up to ecotourism, diversify the economy, and hence the need to think more longer term. And it's true, it's a continuum. You can't think about just the immediate and forget about the longer term because of the long term implications. We are expanding in terms of population, but the land, as Dr. Esther mentions, the linkages with land, the land is not expanding. We need every available space in a lot of these spaces. And hence, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Sarah. Thank you, Eka. So there's this question from Gloriana, and I think you touched on that. I think both of you, on climate change. So she's wondering, she's thanking you, profusely for very good work, which I want to associate myself with. But she's wondering if you could elaborate more on how this research can be or should be linked to climate change and sustainable development. So I don't know which order you want to go, but just decide.
I'll go first. So I've been lately involved in the space where mine action organizations are thinking about climate change and linking their work to climate change space. And so the discussions is around exactly what happens to mines that have been left on the ground longer term. And while we can say mines bad, mines good. It's quite complex. It's more complicated because we found in some places, like the DMZ zone in Korea, or in the Thai border, or in Zimbabwe, in some places where vegetation has thrived, and there is increasing species of different animals because there is less human interaction where landmines are present. So they're kind of protecting the ecosystem. However, we know that also that mines being left on the ground, now that there is a lot of the chemicals in the explosive elements of the mine are seeping into the ecosystem, and this will eventually get into our food chain. So there is need for us to think about that. But most importantly, it's how the climate change now is impacting on the work of mine clearance organization. So at the moment, I'm in Greece. There is a heat wave. Everything closes between 12 and 5 o'clock. If you are in a post-conflict zone in, say, South Sudan, where mine clearance needs to be done, that means between 12 and 5, mine clearance stops because the conditions for mine clearance organizations or the deminers becomes impossible. It is also what we are seeing in places like Ukraine, where you know, when the dam burst and the mines have been shifted from places where they've been cleared to, you know, they've been shifted, and now that kind of takes the mine clearance organizations back to ground zero, because they need to then to identify where the mines have been laid and mark those areas as safe. So there is quite a lot of connection, and it connects also with how communities, you know, are living around, improving their resilience and all that. So there's quite a huge debate on that, and it's not as simple as mine clearance is good for climate change or that. It's more complex, and it's generated quite a lot of discussion. But the good thing is that the mine action organizations are thinking about these things. They're thinking about their impact. So when mine clearance is happening, there's a lot of, for example, lifting up the topsoil for clearance. Once they've finished, there is a call for the need for them to do something what is the word, re-engage with that place, mitigation, you know, to allow that for that land to become usable, because there is a lot of interruption in terms of the vegetation. They have to clear the vegetation first before. So there's a lot of thought in terms of embedding environmental consideration in the work of mine clearance and mine clearance organizations. I'll leave it at that, but I'm happy to have more conversations with Gloriana if she's interested in that.
Amazing. Please, Esther, yes, go for it.
Yeah. Good. I would say that every action of the mine clearance is related to climate change, because of course, if you are clearing mine, is a form of disaster risk reduction. And of course, if you reduce these natural disasters such as landslides and floods, of course, by the time you remove all these, which are exacerbated by climate change, when you remove all those explosive remnants of war, communities can reduce their vulnerability to these disasters. When these mines are being cleared, of course, you can plant trees, and then you have this issue of carbon sequestration and all the like. So this activity is actually related. Of course, when the mines are cleared, you can do infrastructure to even protect the agro-allied farmers and even the forestry and even the wildlife. So it's related.
Yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
happy to share a paper that we've recently written with 2 other people who are thinking along this line on mine action and the environment. Also, it clearly shows the linkages, but also the efforts that are being done in terms of addressing within the mine action space. So happy to share that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Now, I know Amanda has come up with the follow-up question. I will leave it pending. There's another question from Tracy Frimpong, who is asking you to tell her the relationship between land clearance and law. So basically, what can lawyers do to contribute to mine clearance? Now we have only 5 minutes. So I'll throw this question and then the follow-up from Amanda, leave it there, and each of you just take your time, respond, and give us your concluding reflections, because we need to, end it exactly 1:30. So, who wants to?
Yeah. So I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
So Amanda
yes.
and Law, not Amanda. Sorry. Who was this? Someone
Tracy,
else.
Tracy from yes.
Tracy. I think that's a very good question. I wonder if that would be yeah, I don't know if Sarah can help us. I mean, I think when I think of law, what comes to my mind is, the legality or the illegality of using these weapons, really, and what pressure can be put to insist that, as many countries as possible are prevented from doing this. Of course, you need to bear in mind the industrial complex around this. Every time you say certain arms cannot be used, they're really large producers. And again, you'll be surprised that, those who are producing these and, from the proceeds, making huge donations to art foundations and all of these spaces. So very intricately woven context, I think maybe publicizing, but also thinking of the pressures one needs to put also those using them, right? Is there, so I'm no expert at all in this space. These are very lay contributions to this. But when you speak of the law, that is what comes to my mind. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, so who wants to go next? Let me probably Sarah.
Yeah, I think that
Yes.
the relationship between landmines and or land and issues and law is that the use and clearance and the obligations to do all that is defined through by international humanitarian law. You know, there's the countries that use or produce. There's the Mine Ban Treaty, the international Mine Ban Treaty that was signed by countries committing themselves to making sure they do not use, they do not develop, they do not trade, and the countries that have mines on the ground, that they report on the efforts. So there is a whole section on that links mine action and issues of landmines to law. But as you say, we are short of time, so I'll leave it at that. And
I think I'll go with
thank
Sarah.
you. There are questions about cross-border effect and stuff. Yeah, so yes, go for it, Esther.
Yeah, I'll go with the thought of Sarah. You know, there are a lot of laws regulating all of that, but I'm not sure that's for the study to really look into, because of course, in times of war, you are expected to have all of these explosives around. It's about the immediate clearance after the war, you know, which would impact on the livelihood and the development of the state. That should be paramount in our research. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So look, we have only 2 minutes, and today I want to be very good chair, so I won't exceed my time. And there are several other questions in there. Please send the email to Eka or any of the speakers, Sarah, Esther, and then I'm sure they will be happy to engage. Or send the email to the one that sent you the invitations. That's sent you the link, and then these messages will get to the speakers. Thank you so much, Eka. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Esther, for this very thought-provoking presentation on a very important topic. In fact, some of the questions that are coming in are around cross-border mine clearance conversations, which is something worth taking forward. The other follow-up question from Amanda was on how to get bodies like the AU interested in this. And obviously, this is a very, very important topic that we will dissect. But I guess what the takeaway from this conversation is that mine clearance is more than just a military or a technological adventure. It goes beyond that to affect people's livelihoods, to affect people's security, to affect the long-term impact of conflict on societies, which we need to reflect upon and carry forward, get policymakers interested, get funders interested to fund such studies and research. So look, thank you so much. You will hear from us again in another quarter. We will come back to you with another interesting topic. The NCIRI seminar series has been launched today, and we are going to take it forward. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.